Lilla grew up in a small, struggling frontier village where survival was harder than the happiness. The land was dry, the crops were failing, and every passing season brought more hunger than the hope. People lived day by day, not knowing what tomorrow would demand from them. In such a place, compassion often became a luxury no one could afford. Lila was born in this. Lila was known in the. Lila was known in the village for her quiet strength. She helped her mother collect water from the distant well, cared for the younger children, and often tried to ease the tensions when the arguments broke out over the food or livestock. Despite her kindness, she had little power over her fate. In a strong world where survival ruled everything, even family bonds uh, could be broken under the pressure. On a harsh winter, the village reached its breaking point. A long drought had killed most of their crops, and the remaining cattle were barely alive. Food supplies were nearly gone. Lila's family faced a painful choice: starve together or sacrifice something valuable to survive a little longer. That something becomes Lila. A traveling trader had arrived, offering food, grain, and a strong cow in exchange for one healthy woman. The woman was not spoken of openly at first, but in desperate time, whispers spread quickly. Lila said something was wrong. The moment her father stopped meeting her eyes, her father avoided speaking to her directly. The silence between them grew heavier than the words. The night the decision was made, Lila was not given a real choice. She was told it was for the family's survival that she would be saved, but that this sacrifice would save everyone. But deep inside, she understood the truth. She was being traded like the property. Her heart broke, not from anger alone, but from the realization that love could bend under desperation. The next morning, the Lila was handed over to the trader. In exchange, a single cow and a small supply of grains were to her family. In exchange, a single cow and a small supply of grain were given to her family. She didn't cry at first. She simply stood still, watching the life she knew fade behind her as she was led away. The cow mooed softly as if mocking the price of her freedom. The journey began under a burning sun. The trader's men kept her guarded as they moved through the rough terrain towards the distant markets. Lila remained silent, her thoughts tangled between fear and disbelief. She wondered if her family would eat well that winter and whether she would ever see them again. Days later, as they crossed a rocky canyon path, the caravan entered Apache controlled territory. The air shifted, birds went quiet, and even the wind felt caution suddenly from the cliffs. Suddenly, from the cliffs above, epic riders appeared like shadows against the sky. Fast, silent, and precise, they surround the caravan become before anyone could react. Panic erupted, horse reared, guards shouted, and the weapons were drawn too late. The tradesmen were overwhelmed in the moments. In the confusion, Lila was thrown off balance and left stranded near a rocky slope separated from the both sides of the conflict. She braced herself, expecting violence or capture. But something unexpected happened. Among the epic riders were the leader's guy, a calm and observant figure who did not rush into the brutality. Like the others, as the chaos settled, his attention fell on Lila. She was not armed, not fighting, just standing here and amid dust and fear. Their eyes met briefly, enough for him to see something differently in her, not weaknesses but resilience. Instead of leaving her behind or treating her as spoils of the conflict kind, raised his hand singularly. His meant to stop. The decision was silent but firm. And in that moment, Lilla's life took a turn. She could never imagine Lilla's expected punishment, captivity, or even death when Kyle and his epic rider surrounded it. In her world, strength was often answered with the fear and survival, meaning Trusting no one, she went. Kyle ordered his men to leave the battlefield and take her with them instead of harming her. She could not understand what was happening. Her instincts told her to resist, but there was nowhere to run in the vast desert that now surrounded her. They traveled for hours through the rough terrain, rocky hills, narrow passes, and the stretches of the dry land that seemed unless Lilla roared silently, bound not by the chains, not but by its uncertainty. Kyle stayed ahead, really turning back as if he had already knew she would follow whether she wanted to or not. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the question neither spoke aloud. Eventually, they reached a hidden settlement deep within a desert valley. It was not a village like hers. It was fully concealed between cliffs and natural formation among the invisible unless you were already inside. Smoke rose gently from the fire. Children ran barefooted, and people moved with a purpose rather than a cause. It was community built on the discipline and survival, not fear or the fear. Lila was brought to on the center of the camp. Some warriors stared at her with curiosity, others with suspicion. Outsiders were rare and strangers were rarely welcome without the reason. She felt exposed as though every part of past had been stripped away. Kyle finally spoke to her directly. His voice was calm but firm. You are not a prisoner here, he said, but you are not free to leave until you understand where you are. Those words confused her even more. In the following days, Lila learned that life in the epic settlement was harsh, but surprisingly structured. Everyone contributed. No one survived alone. Men trained in hunting and defense, women worked in gathering, crafting and healing, and even children were taught responsibility early. There was no luxury, but there was respect for the strength and effort. Kyle observed her quietly. He did not force her into the labor or punishment. Instead, he allowed her to watch, learn, and decide. There was unfamiliar to Lila. No one in her previous life had given her space to choose. One evening, after she tried unsuccessfully to escape the camp and got lost in the desert for a few hours, Kyle found her without anger. Instead of scolding her, he handed over her the water and simply said, the desert teaches faster than I do. The moment shifted something inside her. He was not treating like property or a burden. He was treating like someone capable of learning. Days turned into the weeks. Lila began to adopt. She learned how to find the water sources, how to ride a horse without fear, and how to read the desert winds. The warriors, once distant, began teasing her gently when she had mistakes. Slowly, laughter entered her life again, something she thought she had lost forever. Kai's personality puzzled her the most. He was serious in the leadership, but surprisingly witty in the private movement. He would correct warriors with the dry humor or turn tense situations into the calm decision with a single sentence. One when Lilla struggled to a fire, he remarked, if fire refuses you, maybe if asking if it's for permission. Despite herself, she started smiling more around him. Then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliff sky, finally addressed her situation openly. He stood beside her at the edge of the settlement and said, I won't send you back, I won't sell you, but I can give you a home if you stop seeing this place as your cage. He paused and something again, then added something unexpected. But I cannot do it alone. I need trust. I need something real in return, not obedience, but choice, maybe even love if you ever had it here. Lila did not respond immediately. The idea of love felt strange in a place he once feared. Yet for the first time since leaving her village, she did not feel like an object being moved from one owner to another. She felt like someone standing at the edge of a new life, one that she might actually choose herself. Life in the epic settlement had begun to feel strangely stable for the Lila. But peace in the desert never lasts, just as she was starting to understand the rhythm of her new world. Danger returned from the place she thought she had escaped forever. The trader who had originally taken her from her village did not forget her. To him, Lila was not a person who had survived the chaos. She was still a payment he had lost when rumors reached him that she was alive and living among the epic. His greed turned into obsession. He gathered a group of armed mercenaries and trackers, promising them gold, weapons, and land if they brought her back alive. Their plan was simple: attack the settlement quickly, capture Lilla, and disappear before the epic could respond. But Kyle people were not easy prey. One early morning, as the camp was waking up, Scout reported moment in the distance. Kyle immediately understood the threat. There was no time for panic, only action. He ordered evacuation routes for the children, prepared defenses, and assigned warriors to keep position across the cliffs. Lila, however, was not sent away. Kyle looked at her and said, "If you stay, you must choose to fight. Not because I asked, but because you want to survive." It was the first time she was being asked to make a decision under pressure that truly mattered. Before she could really process it, the attackers arrived. What what followed was the chaos. The mercenaries charged into the valley expecting easy victory, but the epic fighters struck from the hidden position. Arrow flew, horses scattered, and the narrow desert terrain turned the battle into a deadly maze. The sound of steel shouting and dust filled in the air. The Lila found herself caught in the middle. At first, she froze, feared the pulling her back into the memories of the day she was treated like property, but something inside her snapped. She grabbed a fallen rope and a discarded dagger and moved instinctively toward the capture. Kyle fought at the front line with the controlled precision, never wasting the moment, even in the chaos. He seemed calm as if the battle was simply another language he understood better than anyone else. When he saw Lilla cornered by two attackers, he did not hesitate. He cut through the fight and pulled her away from just in time. Stay close, he shouted over the noise. From that moment, everything changed. There was no longer a leader, an outsider. They were partners in survival. The attack follow was brutal and fast as attackers repeated and regrouped. They attempt to recapture Lila directly believing she was their key prize. Kyle and Lila were forced into the moving battle across the cliffs and sand dunes and narrow canyon paths. At one point, Lila used her knowledge of terrain she had learned in the settlement to mislead pursuers into the dead end ravine. Another, Kyle outmaneuvered a mounted attacker by forcing his horse into the unsettled ground. Their coordination, though unspoken, began to feel unnatural. Between intense moment of the danger, there were flashes of unexpected comedy, even the chaos. One warrior accidentally tried to ride the wrong horse and ended up chasing his own team. Another slipped during a charge and slid straight into a supply cart, causing it to explode to the scattered food and the weapons. Even Guy, normally serious, muttered dryly, next time we fight with the fewer idiots, Leela. Despite the fear laughed for the first time during the battle, but the attackers were persistent. As the sun rose higher, the fight escalated into the final pursuit through a rocky canyon. Kyle and Nella were forced to stand their ground together, realizing escape was no longer no option. Back to back, they prepared for the final clash. Kyle clashed at her and said quietly, "You did not belong to them before, and you won't belong to them now." Lilla tightened her grip on the dagger. For the first time in her life, she was not running away from her fate. She was facing it beside someone who chose to stand with her. The final clash in the cannon was unlike anything Lilla had ever experienced. The narrow, rocky walls echoed with the footsteps, shouted orders, and the clash of the weapons. Dust filled with the air so heavily that visibility came and went like flickering shadows. Kyle and Lilla stood back to back, surrounded by the mercenaries who were determined to claim Lila as their prize and destroy anyone who protected her. But something had changed. Lila was no longer the frightened girl who had been traded for a cow. She had survived the hunger betrayal, desert survival, and brutal conflict. Now she stood with the steady breath and the focused eyes gripping the dagger she had once feared to hold. Kyle beside her moved like the shield, calm, precise, and unwavering. The battle erupted in the waves. Kyle took on multiple attackers at once, redirecting their momentum instead of meeting it with the brute force. Lila used agility and awareness learned through the months of the desert life to outmaneuver those who underestimated her. For the first time, she was not just surviving, she was fighting with a purpose. At the critical moment, Kyle was stuck during a close encounter. He staggered slightly, and that small weakness was enough for two mercenaries to rush towards him. Lila reached instantly without thinking. She threw her towards herself, striking one attacker and pushing the other off balance. It was not perfect, but it was enough to save the Kyle from a killing blow. Kyle looked at her in a surprise, not because she had fought, but because she had chosen to protect him. The battle ended shortly, and the mercenaries, disorganized, exhausted, and retreated under the pressure of coordinating epic defense. Uh, Silence slowly returned into the cannon, broke only by the wind moving through the rocks. Dust settled, revealing the aftermath of the fight that might have changed everything. Kyle collapsed to one knee, injured but alive. Lila rushed to him immediately, pressing close against his bound for the first time. There was no distance between them, no leader, no outsider, no prisoner. Only two people who had survived something impossible together. When Kyle finally gained his strength, he looked at Lila with a different compression before, not command, not curiosity, something quieter, more something more vulnerable. You should leave now, he said softly. This place will never stop being dangerous for you. You are not bound here. It was the moment Lila had once dreamed of freedom. She could return to what remained of her life or start somewhere new without ties. Instead, she looked around the cannon, the back at the Kyle. I was never truly free before, she said, not in my village, not when I was traded, not even when I was alone in the desert. She paused, breathing deeper. But here I choose to fight, I choose to stay. That feels more like freedom than anything I have ever known. Kyle remained silent, having sure how to respond. He had led the warrior survivor volume, survived wars, and built a life on the discipline, but emotional honesty was unfamiliar territory. Lila continued, her voice steady. You once told me this place could be my home if I choose it. I think I understand what you mean. A home is not something you are given, it is something you have decided to belong to. Kyle looked down for a moment, then back to her. And love? He asked quietly, recalling his earlier words. Lilla gave a small, genuine smile, the firstborn, not from the humor, but from understanding. Love isn't the price or an exchange, he said. It is what happens when you stop running from someone who would never stop standing beside you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The desert wind passed between them, carrying away the noise of the battle and leaving one stillness. Kyle finally nodded, as a commander, but as a man. Not as a commander, but as a man. From that day onward, Lila was no longer the woman sold for a cow. She was no longer captive, a survivor, or an outsider. She was someone who chose her place in the world. And the person who stood beside her was no longer just a protector, but someone who had become part of her home. And in the heart of the desert, surrounded by the scars of the war and the silence of the peace, a new beginning was born, not from this ownership, but from choices, trust, and a love.